From the start, the fuel system on this bike was a little unusual. We had decided early on not to use an electric fuel pump, which necessitated pressurizing the fuel tank. The tank was made of steel and used what was available at the time, which was 44-gallon drum fittings, which I got brand new from a place that manufactured them. Those in New Zealand at least will be familiar with the Ream brand, and they were good enough to help out with the bits and the actual cap itself. The steel tank, which was made by friends, was braced inside. You can see through the opening here, one of the horizontal braces, and that was to handle the pressure. We also added onto the bottom a thermal blanket due to the proximity of the turbocharger to the bottom of the tank. So you can see that in this photo where the tank is reasonably close to the turbocharger. We didn't want too much heat going from that into the tank if possible. This gauge is up on the gauge cluster. It just shows the fuel tank pressure. There was difficulties with that, but I'll explain later. At the start of any race, the tank had to be pressurized using this little Schrader fitting. Sometimes after a lap, it also needed the tank pressure boosted again, and that was when you'd see one of my friends hop the fence with an air pump and give it a couple of squirts just to keep it going. What would happen is after the first lap, the tank and the fuel in it would actually cool down and lose pressure. Without the pressure, the fuel was not forced into the carburetor or into the other valve which supplied fuel. So it had to be pumped up so that the first lap of the race you could actually build boost and get it going. Manifold pressure was used to pressurize the tank through this hose fitting via a control valve. So basically you needed to get the bike going before you could self-sustainingly build boost and therefore pressurize the tank. The final iteration of the tank pressurization system took a bleed off the intake manifold through a restriction and a one-way valve direct to the tank. The control valve simply bled off excess pressure and therefore limited what pressure the tank actually saw. Apart from the wastegate activation bleed off the intake manifold, there were also two other pipes. One was to the tank pressurization system, and the other one was to a boost gauge on the dash. This is the actual valve that I made, which was, in this case was used to control the tank pressure. So pressure from the tank was actually fed into this valve, and once it reached a certain pressure, that lifted the piston within the valve body, which opened up the little bleed valve before limiting the tank pressure. This is actually the valve that controls fuel flow once boost exceeds a set limit. It works very similarly to the valve that controls pressure to the tank. This connection on the tank pressurization valve is simply a dump over the side. This connection is to the tank itself, so it sees fuel tank pressure. This pressure in the valve pushes the piston down against a spring inside. Once that piston moves, it opens a valve and lets the pressure flow out the vent tube. The other valve, which controls fuel flow when above typically about 10 pounds boost, provides fuel to this inlet on the carburetor. The fuel tank has two fuel taps. The left-hand one supplies the valve which opens when the boost comes up. The right-hand one feeds the carburetor. The right-hand side needs to flow quite a bit of fuel, hence the large filter and the larger hose sizes. The carburetor itself is from a Kawasaki Z1R TC. The two adjustable screws you can see control the low speed and the high speed fuel mixtures, and the power jet has been added to supplement that. In addition, of course, there is the fuel supplied by the small valve in a completely separate circuit. This small tube devconned into the bottom of the carburetor is what feeds the power jet. A small boss was created on the top of the carburetor by welding and machining, and then the power jet added. The air filter is a standard car type paper air filter bought from probably Repco or someone like that, a long time ago, can't remember.